Hi, my name is Enrique Dryere, and I have been an indie game developer for the past 10 years. I started working when I was in college with my brother. Then later on, I met my wife, who is now our lead artist, and we've been making games together for, well, 10 years. One of the reasons that I initially got into this business without knowing all of the difficulties that would come ahead is simply because I'd spent most of my life playing video games, and I wanted to find a way to turn all of that wasted time into expertise. So that's the reason that I got into it. I first had a degree in psychology from the University of Texas at Austin, and I moved to Dallas simply to get a degree in video game design, which was being offered at the University of Texas at Dallas. And I went on to also get an MFA. I would say that if you want to get into video game development, and I don't say this in any jaded way, really, but I just want to say that you have to be able to have the luxury of defining success as it should be defined, which is the capacity to do what you love. Unfortunately, not all of us have the capacity to do that. It requires a special moment in life that permits you to do that. And we've been very fortunate to, thanks to some Kickstarters and to the support of our family and friends, and of course the successes that we've had, to be able to sustain a humble form of life while doing what we're passionate about. So enough about me, let's get to our most recent project, which is what this is all about, Popup Dungeon. So how did Popup Dungeon start? Well, it started in the nerdiest way possible, which was with a bunch of friends getting together, playing Dungeons and Dragons. What else, right? But as time passes and your high school friends move away, or you move away from them, or you go to college and then you have to, of course, go get jobs in different places and you move away. Well, you lose your crew and you can find a new one. And of course, I recommend you do, but maybe you still want to be able to keep in touch and play with those friends. And so we wanted to create something that would allow you to do that. Now, there are tools that let you do this. There's just Discord and some cameras and some dice. There's Roll20 and things of that nature. So we didn't really want to go out and create something that is just a tool for playing Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that just wasn't our intent. We wanted to create a system that makes it very simple to create Dungeons and Dragon-like games. And most specifically, it was a board game based on Dungeons and Dragons called Castle Ravenloft that had these little paper craft things and these cutout characters that really evolved into what our game is. One of the things that we loved to do was homebrew, to create our own characters, to create our own abilities. And one of the things that you're going to run into right away when you start doing this is your friend comes in with the idea of that, I'm going to roll this dice, and if it's any odd number, I just kill the thing, and if it's an even number, I'm healed full. It's like, relax, we're not doing that, right? We have to have some sort of way of monetizing, to have a currency of power, right? So that we can be able to each in our own time create our characters, and that they come together and that they make sense with one another, that they're balanced. So that was another big deal that we wanted to make sure that we were doing, that the game was going to automatically balance things at an atomic level, which we'll get into later. So the first step was really to get going with a Kickstarter. And in the Kickstarter, we ran into some issues, of course, because we went in dry. We didn't have any sort of build up of advertisement or contacting people. We just launched the thing and started going, right? So that's a really tough thing to do, but if anyone is interested in Kickstarters, the most important thing that you should do is reach out, of course, to influencers who are some way relevant to your field or to your game or to your media type. And then you, of course, want to reach out to other creators in the Kickstarter space. Why? Because if you're able to collaborate with them, you're already hitting an audience that's interested in backing projects on Kickstarter, right? So you get a lot better crossover there. And some people might look at that as a little bit of a hyper commercialism, like you're selling out or something. It's not really that. It's just that if you're expecting Kickstarter to just be the discovery engine, like you're just going to put it on Kickstarter and just let the good times roll, that's going to be really tough. You're going to need a lot of luck for that to work. So another thing that was a very big deal right away in making Popup Dungeon, because it just sort of came from the original design, was we realized, hey, we're doing more than just creating an auto balancing system that then you can fight in. We're creating a tool for making a game, an experience, a story. One of the things that I find almost sad is how much time has been spent out there by so many creative minds trying to come up with a good storyline, a good background, a good world, characters, equipment, all of these things for their friends as a dungeon master. You know, anyone who's tried to be a dungeon master for a tabletop game knows it could take 6 hours to play 2 hours. You know, it's like almost like you're doing animation work where it takes like a week to make 5 seconds. So all of that is kind of lost to time because it exists in the theater of the mind and in somebody's notebook or binder or on note cards, but that's it. We wanted to create a system in which whenever you created this experience, you would keep it. It would be something you could share with the world if you wanted to, or you could keep it to play with your friends later, like maybe 10 years down the line or whenever. It's something that is more permanent and shareable. So what we realized very quickly is, well, not everyone's a game developer, so we had to make it as easy as possible. So that's what we did. The ultimate goal of Popup Dungeon was to create a system that allows you to create an entire campaign and experience with your own characters, with your own equipment, with your own storyline as fast as possible, as easy as possible, and to make it kind of be the first step that people have on a pathway towards game development. So you don't even have to have made a mod before. You don't have to open up Maya or Blender or some 3D programmer. You don't need to know programming. You just can create your own game. And you can be sure that it's going to work with the character that your friend created to play in your game. Those were the things that were most important to us. So why did Popup Dungeon take 7 years to develop? That's a really good question, right? Well, it's because we did not know what we were doing when we got into this. It was just literally flying by the seat of our pants. We had made a space shooter RPG before this. And so we were just launching into this huge thing. And as you may know, there's so many. I mean, the story of Kickstarter is strewn with the shipwreck of a thousand dreams that were dashed on the rocks of reality, right? It's just something that is so hard to do, is to go from idea to execution. And sometimes you're just promising too much. Well, maybe we had promised too much. But instead of saying, well, we're just going to have to deliver what we can because we got to get through this, and you know, we're not going to make that much money off of it, so we just got to. We said, you know what? We have the capacity to do it. We have the passion to do it. So we took our time. We did it right. And hopefully, I think we delivered something that most people who initially followed the project were satisfied with for the most part. So during that time, the hardest part of the whole process was very simply not being able to develop the game. Because if you actually play the game, you're going to see that the game is something that I developed in about 1.5 years. Some of these campaigns are something that was developed in a month. They're very quick to do because that's the whole point of the tool. But for the first 5 years or so, we couldn't actually really develop the game because the engine was being developed. The tools with which the game could even be created were being developed. So at that time, I was spending most of my time helping with that and creating assets, you know, the tile sets. My wife, Courtney, was making the artwork. And my brother, Paul, is the main developer, who is really, main programmer, I should say, who is really focused on making the core engine at the time. So all of these things were very difficult to do because, you know, you're 4 years into the thing and you haven't played it. And you think, is this even going to work? Is this going to be any fun at all? Et cetera, et cetera. So it was a very difficult and trying time psychologically. But that was really the hard part. Once we had that engine going, it was like running downhill. And it was a lot of fun to develop in it and a lot of fun to get other people developing in it. We had fans immediately creating characters and enemies and equipment and even games. So what was the result of all of this, right? What did we actually come up with? Well, like I said, if you play the game, you're going to see it plays a little bit like a tech demo. And what I mean by that is it just is designed to show you what you can do with the tools. And the tools are designed in such a way that every ability is sort of like a molecule of the game. But molecules are made up of atoms. So let's talk about the atoms first, because that's, like I said before, this game is balanced atomically. Now, what do I mean by that? You know, it sounds kind of silly to say out loud. But what I mean by that in concept is if I have an ability and I just put something simple like dealing fire damage, slashing damage, doesn't matter. I'm going to deal X fire damage. Let's say 10 fire damage, okay? Now I can add a lot of other things to this card, to this ability. Every ability is held on a card. If I add a condition, let's say the enemy must be stunned, otherwise I can't do this slashing damage to it. So previously I would have had to stun it with an ability. Now I can do my slashing damage. Well, obviously this is a more restricted ability. That means the slashing damage is going to be more powerful. And if I add another beneficial effect, let's say I remove the condition, I add a beneficial effect. So now I'm slashing them and I'm also like hamstringing them. So I slow down their movement ability. They can't move as much. Well, now I'm sharing the power. So I'm going to do less damage and then I'm going to snare them. I can control the weights to say, hey, let me slow them down more or let me hurt them more. I can bring it down to a point where I'm barely slowing them down and almost doing the full damage or vice versa. Then you can also add a negative. A negative is something that, let's say that I remove these, just to make things simple, I don't have to think about the power being shared. I'll remove the snaring. I'm just doing the slashing damage, but I'm breaking my back as I do it. I really swing like a wild swing, and I pull my back out while I'm doing it, so I'm hurting myself too. So I'm dealing damage to myself in order to deal more damage, right? Because now I'm using, think of that currency again. Instead of the action points or mana, of the game, the things that give you the capacity to act, I'm now consuming health. I could also be consuming a different resource, like a statistic of myself. So I could be slowing myself down in order to deal the damage. But anytime I take a negative, which is a static negative, it's always bad to me, I'm going to increase the damage of the ability. So here you start seeing how this works at an atomic level. I can combine up to 4 effects. I can also set the range of it, the cost of it, the amount of uses, the cooldown, the charge time. I can draw my own area of effect. So I can say I'm making a line, I hit everything in that line. I can choose whether or not it obeys line of sight. So it'll hit the target and keep going, or it'll end at the first target it hits. You have all the full spectrum of control that you'd need for creating this sort of tactical game. But really, truly, the jewel of this all, if you wanted to get advanced, is in the campaign creator. And this is this wonderful node graph. And this node graph is something that starts very organically. This is the point. I get one story node, and then I connect 2 story nodes to it. I've already created a branching path. Branch A, branch B, right? Now I can add something like a dialogue tree. This dialogue is held in a single node that you just double click to enter, and it's like you have a whole other graph. So it keeps everything very organized for you. It lets you create interactive fictions about as easily as you could possibly hope for. It isn't easy to create these things. I mean, you got to think about if you're actually trying to sit down and write in a piece of just some notebook paper, how this is going to work. It's actually very difficult to do. It just actually is hard to write a story that's engaging. I mean, I think we've all had the experience where we're telling somebody a dream that happened last night and we thought it was really cool, and the person starts yawning. It's difficult to tell a compelling story. That part we can't help you with. But we can make it easy for you to tell the compelling story you already came up with. And so give you a new medium by which to do it. And especially if it's branching, if it's an interactive story, well, forget about it. This is a really simple system to do it in. But now let's talk about how you start creeping into programming, right? Because that's kind of the main point here. One of the nice things is that we are also able to introduce the basics of programming to novices. Well, let's say that I created a dialogue, but I don't want the effect to happen right away. I said something to somebody and I want that to have an impact down the line. Do I have to create a whole different branch that just has the identical, like to another branch, except that way down the line? No, you don't have to do that. You just have to hold a variable, a flag as we call it, but it is just a value. So variables are obviously integral to programming. They're kind of the whole thing. It's like the unit of information or data that you're trying to keep and hold and then interact with in some way. So you create your information, you set it in any way that you want, and then you read it based on an inequality. Is it greater than? Is it less than? Is it equal to? And you can do any type of logic that you want. So all of a sudden, you've gotten this value, which is just a simple flag. I said yes or no to this person at this point, and later on, it has an effect. and it's based on a check. And that is an if statement. And so basically you've done the first step of programming. Now this can get a lot more complicated. You can run arithmetics, all kinds of things on these values, as you might expect. You can use them as resources. So that can be currency, it can be faction. You're creating your own money system. It can be something like as simple as I've got a key. This NPC or this character gave me a key. I can open a door later on, because I have this key. I don't have to check if I have the key or not when I reach the door. You can show this to the player or not. You can also use it as crafting materials. So for instance, you can have something like a piece of wood, a scrap of metal, a piece of twine, and all together you put them together to make blank, a shield, a weapon, whatever it might be. So it's a way that you, as the creator, can come up with anything that you can imagine with the system. It can lead to a whole board game, or just like I said, a little crafting system, a little faction system, just keeping track of the items that somebody has collected on their journey. It can be used inside or outside of combat. All kinds of good things, but it's very subtle the way you get into it, because it really comes from a necessity. You have an idea. You don't think, I'm going to sit down and learn programming. You think, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to create this story. Well, I start creating the story and I very quickly realize that in order to tell the story efficiently, I kind of need to do this thing, right? I need to keep this information. Well, how do I do that? And so you immediately, out of necessity of your creativity, start learning a skill. And that's what's so nice about it. The end product is that we've had people who have never even used a mod before, have never modded a game before, create entire games. We've had over 1,000 shared characters in the workshop that span every genre you can imagine, from video games to fictional characters, from literature to TV personalities to YouTubers, to somebody's friend, somebody's cat. Doesn't matter. Anything goes, right? And of course that applies to enemies and equipment as well, and dozens of games. So it sounds like it all went really well, right? But let's talk about what was learned, because there was definitely some things we learned as well from doing this, and some ways that it could have gone better, perhaps. One of the things that is, the most important lesson, I would say, that was learned out of all of this was immediacy. As we started going from Kickstarter, which already was having some trouble, we're thinking, hey, maybe people aren't really understanding what the concept is because it doesn't exist yet. We've just put together a few videos, little mock-ups, and people will get it once it exists. But we went from Kickstarter to our first convention, which was many years later, when we could first show some of the gameplay. And at that point in time, I saw very quickly that it was difficult. It was actually really hard to explain what the game was. I found that it took like 5 minutes of just heavy lifting, explaining to people, yeah, this is like this, and this is going to work like that, and that's going to work like this, and this. And I could see that their eyes were brightening. Maybe they were being kind to me because I'm talking to them for 5 minutes, and they, just wanted to say, oh, sounds cool, I'll check it out. All right, bye, But for the most part, I felt like most people were being genuine in their response, that they went from mild interest to more interested as they learned about it, but it took a lot of heavy lifting to get there. Well, at the time, I was just simply not experienced enough to know how bad of a situation that is, right? Because let's just think about it. There's like 9,000 games that are released a year on Steam alone. So they're coming out a barrage of games, and at most you're going to have people for about a minute and a half, if you're lucky, with a trailer where they're just going to tune out. If you can't explain it in person, answering questions within a minute, good luck explaining it with a trailer, or that people would even know what it is. It's almost impossible. So what this all leads me to want to say to anyone out there who's wanting to create a game that's going to be commercially successful. If you don't care about commercial success, by the way, forget about this. This isn't important. Please go out there and create the most wildly creative, complicated thing you want. But if you care about commercial success, which unfortunately we all must to some extent, then let me introduce the concept of the Kimchi Hot Dog. Okay, the Kimchi Hot Dog is what I've kind of come to call this. It's like this with that. Right? Okay, so let's see if we can make sense of this. First off, what is kimchi? Maybe you don't know. Okay, it's a Korean dish that is basically a pickled cabbage that's spicy. And a hot dog, hey, it's a weenie in between two pieces of bread, right? We're not going to get into the discussion whether it's a sandwich or not. So we put the spicy thing on the hot dog, and we have a thing that we know and maybe a thing that we are kind of familiar with, and our brain can immediately think, it's going to taste like this. I'm interested. Give me one of those. So that's what you're looking for, right? It's a bit of novelty with enough familiarity and also that sort of whetting of the appetite. So to continue on the topic of food, on the analogy here, let's talk about a sushi restaurant. Or you can think of it as a pizza restaurant or whatever you want. But if you go to a sushi restaurant, you see 100 rolls on the menu, right? There's 100 rolls and you can't even begin to read them all. But you just order a California roll because it's like, that's what I know. So just give me a California roll. You might say, let me get the California roll with the salmon on top of it. It's called an Alaskan roll, or the caterpillar roll. That's a California roll or with the avocado on top. I don't know if it's that. I think it's a little different. But the point is, you're only differentiating. You're only moving away from your comfort zone by a little bit. Okay, so that's the point. You're immediately able to tell the person, it's like this with that. So if I were to try to do that with Popup, and it's not going to work very well, but I'll do it. It's like a Mario Maker, but instead of focusing on level design, you're focused on gameplay and storytelling. Okay, that leaves a lot of things unanswered, but it'd be much easier to say it's like Legend of Zelda, but you're playing as the bokoblin or something. It's just something that is more immediate. It's just something that the person can think, hey, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd like to try that. And if you can't do that with that one sentence, with that one image, the still frame of your game, or even the title of your game, if you can, then you're going to have a much harder time getting people's interest because you have a lot of heavy lifting to do. And don't ever let anybody tell you that you can just make a good game and that's going to do it. Because there's no way that the person knows that the game is good until they've played it. And even if I hear my friend, and I'm sure this is not telling you anything that you don't already know, you've probably experienced this yourself. Your friend has told you time and time again, man, the show is really good. The show is really good. Or this game is really good. You should give it a try. And you're like, yeah. I don't know. And you play it or you watch it and it's really good. And you think, why didn't I play this before? That's because even with word of mouth, the game is good or the thing is good is not as powerful as it ought to be for many reasons, right? We don't need to get into all of it, but you can kind of intuit that is not going to have as much of the power that you might think initially in a naive state that it would, which is to say, if I just make something good, it'll work. Because there's no way that the person knows. So that's basically the concept of the kimchi hot dog. And you got to be very careful about these Venn diagrams, okay? So the Venn diagrams being those circles that overlap to some extent. In the 90s, there was this idea of like making an RTS with an FPS, first person shooter and a real-time strategy game. If I have the fan base of a real-time strategy game and the first person shooter, and I create one that's both, I'm going to get both of the circles. But that's not what the Venn diagram shows you. It shows you you're only going to get the overlap. And even then, you're not going to get all of the overlap. You're only going to appeal mostly to the overlap. And yes, maybe one person from here, one person from there will discover that they like it anyways. But the point is you're not getting both of those circles. So be careful when you're trying to smash things together that they're not dissonant to one another, that they don't have nothing to do with one another. So like I said, a real-time strategy game and a first-person shooter, it sounds like that should be good, but they really don't necessarily have much to do with one another. So there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done by the creator to make that good. So that's really the main commercial lesson that we learn from Popup Dungeon. There's also a very good technical lesson to be learned, and that comes from the fact that it took us 7 years to make it. That is, learn your tools. We jumped into Unity. We just said, we're going to start using Unity. Here we go. And we're learning Unity while we're trying to create an engine and we're trying to figure out this game and all of these things at once. One of the things that's nice about Popup is if you learn Popup, if you play it a couple times, because like I said, I've almost designed it to be a tech demo. So if you play it, you'll know what it can do. then that will help guide your creativity so that you can create with the tool, not against the tool. So there's a lot of arbitrary things out there that really make things hard for you to enter development that we have just removed. The tedium of making your own levels, the arbitrary nature of having to make sure if this is compatible with that is compatible, which is just up to whatever the creator thought of, you know, however they wanted to implement this thing, whatever dependencies this had, whatever, none of that, you don't have to worry about any of that. That's all taken care of for you. So that's something that we learned the hard way, but we tried to pass on the lessons learned to the players. We can't help you outside of Popup Dungeon, so just be ready for it. Learn your tools before you jump into them, because a lot of times things are going to be a lot easier or a lot harder than you might imagine. And it'll be illuminating actually to see that the thing that you thought that was super hard, like it seems like making a 3D world where you're you know, shooting things and jumping and gravity control and all the physics and finding an item and picking it and making my own house and all this seems so hard to do. And it's actually not trivial, obviously, but it's very simple compared to making a turn-based tactical RPG. It makes no sense if you didn't know about it, but it's because it's what the engines do. You just say, physics, yes, please. 3D world, sure, I'll take that. Add a tree, pop it on, use a brush and just paint the terrain editor and there you go. And the hitboxes are made and the wind zones and away we go. You know, so something that is a full 3D world becomes much easier to make than what we were doing here. So you need to know these things before you jump into them just to be informed. We were not informed. I don't recommend it. So in closing, I hope that I haven't really dissuaded anybody from becoming a game developer. I know that I can be a little bit big sometimes at the way that I will say that things are hard, you know, and things are hard. At least they're the hardest things that I've had to do in my life. Granted, I haven't tried to make rockets or AI or do, you know, brain surgery or anything, but they are tough. If you're looking for an easy way out, video game design is not it, right? It is something that you should do if you're passionate about it. If you have the luxury of defining success for yourself as not being, you know, rich. So all of these things are things that you need to consider before you enter the field of game design. But if you do, and you're anything like me, if you have a passion for these games, you will find it very rewarding to just create these games, to just know that you've put out something into the world that is unique. It's a unique experience that will reach some people. And in this case with Popup is giving them a new way to express their creativity, right? This is something that we set out to do. We accomplished it. And so you get the feeling of accomplishment regardless of what financial success may come or not. So if that sounds like something that you'd want to do, if you want to struggle through all of the hardships to get at that passion, then by all means. But be aware of one very important thing is the reason that the finances may not be there is not because there's evil corporations out there. Yes, there's a lot of luck, you know, that you have to hope for. Who knows if this one streamer is going to play your game or not? Well, he got sick that day. He didn't play it. You know, there's nothing you can do to prepare for that. You can't. You can only, you know, buy more lottery tickets. You can't get the winning lottery ticket. But the difference is that in the case of an accountant, let's just say, there's going to be very few people that are out there that just want to do your taxes for the passion of it. They just want to be your accountant because they love accounting. And yeah, you can pay me if you want, maybe $5, buy me a coffee, but I want to do your accounting. But there are people who will just create video games, artwork, music, write books for no monetary compensation. They're just doing it because it's a passion, because they love to do it. So you're competing with those people all across the world. You're having to create things with people who would be willing to create them for free. So that greatly devalues the amount of money that you can expect in compensation for your work. So keep that in mind, that you're entering a field that is driven by passion. So if part of your payment is not just the ability to work on that passion, don't do it. Stay out and go find something else. Go design some apps or something like that, because that would be obviously much easier. Well, thank you so much for listening to me, and I wish you the best of luck with your career, whatever that might be.